Nick, thanks so much for joining us today on the Sporting Transition podcast. Really grateful for your time to talk to us today about your experiences of that transition from elite sport into the working environment, the workplace. Um, so we've got quite a few topics to cover off today, but before we get into it, we'd love for you just to give us an intro about your, I suppose, academic background as well, because obviously quite a strong one, but also talk to us a little bit about your professional career, what you do now. Make it your elevator pitch, and then we'll unpick it as we go through the next kind of 30, 40 minutes and dig into various parts of it. But yeah, I think our audience would love an elevator pitch to get going with.
Sure. Okay, I'll try to do a tight couple of minutes here then.
Yeah.
So my name is Nick Civetta. Obviously American, former professional rugby player. Started playing rugby at university in the US, what feels like a very long time ago. Transitioned quickly from that to playing professionally. Um, Kind of had a little intermezzo before that as an engineer. So I'd studied engineering and started in that world, and then just sort of launched into playing full time in 2013. Um, Bounced around the professional leagues for a number of years. So played in Italy for a couple of years. Found my way into the English Premiership in 2016, and with that into the U.S. national team side. So spent better part of 6 years playing at a high level of professional rugby, and then also playing for my country, representing the U.S. at the 2019 World Cup. And yeah, post World Cup, played in France. COVID happened, got a bit sort of mentally and physically tired, having played, for basically 2 years straight in the build up to the Rugby World Cup. So decided to apply to do postgraduate studies at the University of Oxford. Somehow they accepted me, so I went to Oxford to study energy systems, which is a degree focused on economics, policy, and engineering in the energy space. While I was studying that, I was still playing. So I was playing in the nascent professional league in the US, Major League Rugby, playing for the national team, studying my degree, doing a lot of travel, doing a very tricky time to be traveling internationally. Spent a lot of time in quarantine in the UK as as the world kind of opened up in the UK. Didn't open up quite as fast. Um, and yeah, my retirement coincided with the U.S. failing to qualify for the 2023 World Cup. So I wouldn't say I went out in a blaze of glory or on my own terms. It just so happened that I had a couple of concussions as well in the final year of my playing career, which was the same year we failed to qualify for the Rugby World Cup. So the combination of those two things made me start to think really hard about what I wanted to do next. I just finished this degree at Oxford, so it was quite good timing, and was able to jump into a job in the energy space, at a company called Aurora Energy Research. So I've been working at Aurora Energy Research for 2 years now, and what I do for them, long story short, is I manage consulting projects in the power market space. So commercial due diligence for transactions, people buying, selling wind farms, portfolios of assets, etc.
Yeah.
And strategy pieces for the government, strategy pieces for industry as well. So yeah, I've been doing that for 2 years. Really enjoy it. I'm looking forward to my future there, and seeing how I can build on what I sort of define as a relatively incomplete transition, but a transition in progress away from sport and into the working world. So that
Yeah.
was 4 or 5 minutes. Type.
Strong intro. Very good. And just out of interest, why do you consider the transition incomplete at this stage?
I don't know. I think there's maybe it's more psychological. There's elements maybe where I don't feel like fully comfortable just going to work every day, clocking in, doing my job, coming home, and that giving me the sort of same level of satisfaction as training and playing elite level sport. So yeah, I think maybe there's an element of getting settled in that still needs to happen. Getting comfortable with the new pace of life. I don't know when that's necessarily going to feel like it's happened, but that's one element of it. And I think on the other side of it, I'm still trying to balance work and family and exercise, and trying to find a healthy balance around taking care of myself, taking care of my mental health, taking care of my physical health, doing my job, supporting my family, supporting my wife and my kid. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's maybe I don't think it manifests itself on a day to day basis, but it is something that I'm conscious of. Is that maybe I'm not
Mhm.
always um, stopping to appreciate how well I think how well
Yeah.
it might actually be going, and maybe just kind of
Yeah.
focused on what can I do to be to be more comfortable sitting at my desk all day. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Super interesting. And it almost feels like it touches on the wider topic of life transition as well as sport in transition, because obviously what everything you've talked about is family, it's
Mhm.
children, it's work, and it's also sport. How much of it do you think is specifically about your past with rugby and kind of still filling that void versus how much of it do you think is more to do with all of the other stuff going on in your life at the moment? And obviously with a newborn that's five
Yeah.
months old, that alone
Um,
is a big milestone and a new identity for you, right, as a parent, as a dad.
yeah, that's a really good question. Funnily, I've just come in from a very rare workout, or a very rare run, and I'm still sweating a bit. So I apologize. Um, Yeah, that's a good question. It probably has manifested itself a bit more since my daughter was born in August. There's a new premium on time, in life,
Mm,
and when you get to pick and choose, and what you do, and then your routine gets screwed up. And I've always been very routine driven as an athlete. I think being an athlete kind of makes you routine driven. Like you have to be at the facility at 8 o'clock. You have to be stretching. You have to be doing this and that. You have to be ready for your meetings, ready for your training, recovering as well. So like there's a lot of built up sort of muscle memory in a routine that is basically out the window now with the I
mm,
think so that's probably losing that part of my athlete identity
mm.
has been tough, and I would say that's probably mostly brought on by having a kid actually, and not by not being an athlete anymore. Because previously, I was still very very able to
Mm.
keep a routine and feel like I was still um, all elements of my life were kind of focused on performance. If you could say that really, you're getting up, you're exercising, you're eating well, you're going to work, you're doing your job, you're coming home, you're supporting your family. Like you can do that without a kid. When you have a kid, it doesn't as you know, Mark, it doesn't really happen that way.
Yeah,
So
no, absolutely
yeah.
doesn't. When it does, it's a luxury. Um, Interesting. So taking a massive step back, I guess, to the earlier days when you chose to go to university at Notre Dame. Um, I remember from our initial conversation, kind of academia, education has always been kind of front foot for you. Um, when did you feel like did you ever go into university or even at a younger age feel like, okay, I want to be a rugby player? Because when I initially spoke to you, it really felt like academia was always what it was going to be. You're going to be an engineer. That felt like a big part of your identity and your person. Your parents would kind of guide you that way and support you that way. But then you find rugby and you turn out to be pretty good at it. So yeah, just wondering, when you were younger, how big of a thing was rugby for you as a potential profession or job?
Yeah, good question. Rugby didn't exist for me till I was 18. I
Mm,
didn't play. I played American football, and I was a wrestler. So sport was always in my life. Team sport was always in my life. Competition um, was always there. I think every kid growing up in the U.S. at least like wants to be a professional athlete. So you have it in
mm,
the back of your mind. God, that'd be cool if I could do this. And obviously, it was never really on the radar. When I found rugby when I was studying civil engineering at Notre Dame. I think studies weren't going particularly well. I think I was struggling to find my place there. It was culturally very different to where I grew up. Very Catholic university in the middle of the country. I mean, I grew up in a Catholic family in New York, but East Coast New York Catholicism is not the same as Midwest Catholicism. Um, so I was struggling to find my footing socially. And rugby kind of existed, when I went to my first training, which was at 6 o'clock in the morning at the indoor football pitch in the middle of winter when it was like minus 40 um, in South Bend, Indiana. It gets obscenely cold. When I went to my first training, I think I just instantly felt a camaraderie and
mm,
um, an ease, you know, guys being around each other that I hadn't felt since playing football in high school, and it even felt slightly more special than that because it seemed like everyone kind of existed on the same plane. And yeah, I think I fell into it in a very natural way, and in a way that was very helpful for me mentally as I was figuring out my studies. So I always had a great sort of positive association with the sport of rugby. From the outset, it was always just pure fun and a lot of parties and a lot of new friends, a lot of traveling.
Mm,
So the progression for making, for getting more and more serious in the sport of rugby was easy for me because I loved it. Like I loved the game, I loved the people in the game, I loved my coach, and he was my Notre Dame coaches. There's two or three guys who were really influential. From the outset, because the rugby community in the U.S. is fairly small, they were the
mm,
ones who were saying, "Hey, Nick, like you should consider pushing yourself a little bit harder, get yourself up for a selection for the under 20s and the All
mm.
Americans, et cetera, et cetera." So the second that I heard that was an option, um, I was sold. There was no like the fact that it was a possibility in itself was so exciting to me. I would have changed my life in a heartbeat to just to try to be a professional rugby player. So
Yeah, it's
yeah.
interesting. And what were the kind of milestones that made your coaches feel like, Nick, keep pushing, push harder because there's a big prize for you potentially? What was it they saw in you that made them
Um,
kind of say those things?
Probably just being really tall. One of the first things. So being 6'8". That's a very
Okay.
strong characteristic for a particular position in rugby, and there's not many.
Yeah.
So at the outset, potentially just some physical attribute that was randomly assigned to me.
Yeah.
But I think I really enjoyed the physicality of it at a young age, and I think I just enjoyed hitting people, and it just was really natural progression. American football and wrestling in particular,
Mm,
body control at the rucks, and picking up scrummaging and having good hands in the lineouts. I think those were some of the things that I brought immediately that I think helped me stand out amongst the very
yeah.
casual university rugby playing crowd that we were. And then I just had to spend a long time, on the order of 6, 7 years honing those skills to get to a point where I could, play for the U.S. or play professionally. So it wasn't instant elevation to
Mm.
level that I wanted to be at or the top level. There was a number of intermediary steps that required a lot of personal growth to accomplish.
And to hit that real growth level is kind of going international really the main option because I remember when we initially spoke, certainly back in the days, not making you sound too old, but the rugby, well, the sport of rugby in the US was probably not quite as developed as it is today. So was going to Europe a logical or a needed step for you to really bring your game to a new height? Or do you think you could have achieved it by continuing to play in the US? I'm assuming without a professional league in the US, you probably wouldn't have too much of an option to do that anyway.
Yeah, good question. So there's a couple guys from my generation who stayed in the U.S. their entire career
Okay.
and figured it out and became quite successful. I played at the World Cup with them, and they
Mm,
took the route at that time of being semi-professional rugby players, and were able to get their level high enough to be selected for the Eagles, etc. But for me, I felt like I was a couple of steps behind them when I was 21, 22, 23, and I needed to
mm,
differentiate myself somehow and put myself in an environment where I really could focus on rugby 100% of the time. I was working in New York City at the time. I was working as an engineer. It was a fairly serious job, and rugby was still pretty tangential. I
mm,
trained at the gym and I'd play semi-professionally, but I didn't feel like I was really getting to the level that I needed to be at to compete um, with the guys who were getting picked for the national team. Um, and it was really a stroke of luck that I found myself moving to Italy to play rugby. But
mm,
when the opportunity presented itself in 2013, it was a no brainer because I knew that it would put me in a situation where my sole focus would be rugby. I was getting paid crap, but I could afford to live in Rome
mm,
and focus 100% of my time, not 100% of my time, but 90% of my time on rugby, and play 30 games a year,
mm,
just to try to consolidate my ability as a men's rugby player.
mm,
See where it would take me. So I kind of had it in my mind that a year or two in Italy would be enough to get me to the national team. Turns out not even close. I went back to
Really?
national team camp in 2014 after a season in Italy, was still well off the pace, didn't make the
Mm,
team in 2014, and then kind of fell into a couple of years where I was just kind of wasn't really sure what I was going to do with rugby. I was playing in Italy, was working part time as well to keep my eye on the professional development um,
mm,
side, and I wasn't getting picked for the U.S. Was really enjoying my time in Italy, but rugby it kind of felt like I'd missed the boat, and I wasn't going to achieve what I'd hoped to achieve in the game of rugby. But that all kind of changed when, out of the blue, and I still have no idea how this happened. I was signed by Newcastle Falcons in
mm,
the Premiership out of the top domestic division in Italy, which is not something that happens every day. Dean Richards must have seen something in me, or maybe he owed my agent something. Who knows? Um, but found myself moving from Florence to the Tyneside, and that's what launched my professional career. So
mm.
yeah, that's kind of a roundabout answer,
That's
but
interesting.
yeah.
But where does careers kind of sit in all of this? So, you studied hard, you've gone to
Mm,
Notre Dame, you've gone to Berkeley, you're now in Italy, but obviously your academic grounding
yeah.
kind of suggests someone who's going to go into a career in engineering, um, and choosing engineering suggests it's also something you're quite interested in or deeply interested in. So yeah, just wondering as you go to Italy, and then you move to Newcastle, where does your career sit in your mind against all of what you're doing with rugby? Do you still feel that rugby is 100% what you want to do, or do you always feel like, I wouldn't mind getting started with my corporate career at some point,
I think
or does that not really feature?
well, I mean, it's like I think I wanted rugby to be the only thing that I
Yeah.
could think about. And I think that the year I spent in Florence, where I was playing semi-professionally, and I was working as a research assistant at the University of Florence, a job that came about in quite a random way as well. That's when I was starting to step back and say, hey, maybe like if this is my last year playing rugby or my last couple of years playing rugby, like I should start to think about where I'll end up. Um, and I always had kind of knew if I had the time, I want to keep up with the professional development, and this was a way that I could. So no, I mean I wanted to be a full time rugby player. When I went to Newcastle and back to Italy, I was still kind of under contract with the University of Florence as a research assistant for a few months. But it's fair to say I wasn't a very good research assistant once I arrived in Newcastle, and my shift was sort of immediately back focused on the rugby. But yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of rugby guys, a lot of American rugby guys, it's probably true in the UK as well. Um, they start playing in uni, or like that's more true in the US. They start playing in uni and they have a subject that they've studied. Maybe they have an internship or two. Like they have an idea of what career development looks like. Whereas here in France, etc., like you're in an academy at 18, your life's focus is rugby from 18, and maybe you haven't stopped to think, what do I want to do with my life? What do I want to do as a career?
Mm,
So like a lot of the guys I know, a lot of guys who I played with on the national team, everyone, went to university and has an idea of what
mm.
what they're going to do. So even having that experience, a couple of years of education, whether you finish or not, like that gives you a good foundation for thinking about what it is you might be good at. That's not sport. So as long as you have
But,
that in your
but
mind,
are you kind of happy that education was there and then rugby kind of came by chance, really? You go to university,
yeah.
you find rugby, you enjoyed it, and it's worked out really, really well. But are you happy that the whole process really started with education? Because as soon as rugby falls to the side, you know you've already got an identity that takes you into the workplace in a way that you've almost prepped yourself for by doing what you've done at Berkeley and Notre Dame.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think it's been a huge enabler to me professionally to have
Mm.
done those degrees. Even though I never really used the masters from Berkeley, it's a huge waste of money. Um, but yeah, I feel very very fortunate that I was able to study and then play, and things kind of happen in the order
Mm.
that they did. There are good opportunities now for players to study and play at the same time playing professionally, and I would always encourage that. Um, and I think having studied at the outset and then sort of setting myself up to play, I wasn't sure if my rugby career was going to be 1 year long or 10 years long, and
Mm,
being nine years long. So it was in my mind at the end of that, if it did stretch longer than I expected, to maybe get some more education to really try to get into exactly what it is I want to do at that time, right? If I had a direction I wanted to travel in, it'd be a good thing to sort of focus on educationally. If not, maybe just do something a bit more generic, like an MBA, and try to hit the ground running
mm,
in the job market. So, yeah, it was a strong
yeah,
foundation, and for other athletes out there, for what it's worth, I think at the outset of your career, it should always be a big focus is making sure that you have something to set yourself up for, set yourself up with after your sport, because you never know when your time is going to come and you can't get back on the pitch.
yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier a couple of things happened in a random way. So you moved to Florence in a random way, and you moved to Tyneside in a random way.
I
It just
guess
feels a lot of
I guess just kind of
serendipity in the air.
avoiding, long tangents.
Yeah.
The
But
sake of,
it's interesting because what do
yeah.
you think you were doing to put you in a position where these opportunities kind of opened up to you? I mean, is it genuinely just luck? Either there's a scout there or a friend of a friend put you in touch with a friend, or do you feel you did something, in Italy that led to a bit of luck that brought you to Tyneside? Or is it just complete luck that it ended up being what it ended up being?
I can give myself a little bit of credit, I think, in this, because while I was in Florence, I think I had recognized that this was probably the year that um, I really needed to double down on myself, on my personal development as a rugby player, to get myself into a point to in the shop window with some team somewhere that was at a level
Mm,
that was higher than where I was playing. Um, and I did feel like I focused on that. I was playing really well. The level wasn't great, but I'd scored most tries on my team, which is not something someone in my position typically does. I had an agent, Scottish agent, who I had been put in touch with through one of my coaches at Notre Dame, who was really helpful and surprisingly seemed really willing to go to bat for me with a couple of teams. And I made my case with highlights to Newcastle, and went for an interview as well.
mm,
And everything went well, and yeah, ended up signing on, not for a huge amount of money, but obviously just the opportunity to play in the Premiership and to train in that environment was a big enabler for my career.
mm,
And then I think simultaneously, from a professional development point of view, I was really searching for work that year. I was
mm,
promised a gig as an engineer from the club president in Italy, to build a new airport in Florence, which to this day hasn't been built. So, needless to say, that job didn't materialize,
yeah.
and I had to find something to make ends meet. And I organized a couple meetings with professors, given my background in civil engineering
Mm,
at Berkeley, was able to get a conversation with their seismic research group, and that evolved
mm,
a paid role, which was pretty
interesting.
cool, and quite good to have alongside of the rugby as well. So yeah, I'll
Yeah, super
give
interesting.
a little bit of credit. There's probably
Yeah,
there's certainly still are elements of luck in there. I got my Italian passport that year as well too, which is a huge enabler
yeah,
in rugby because you can work in.
yeah, of course.
So that's also kind of a structural thing that has nothing to do with my
Yeah.
talent, but just to do with my tenacity and
Mm.
willingness to drag up four generations of Italian heritage documents and get them into Italian consulate. So quite a lot in there, to
Yeah.
to sort of enable that. But then once I was there, I really tried to grab the opportunity with both hands. And in some ways I did, in some ways I didn't. But
Mm.
um,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's interesting. And how confident were you when that time came, where you got the concussions, you were starting to think, okay, maybe this is the end of my career. And how confident were you in that process of going to market to find a job? I mean, everything you've described now would kind of point to someone being quite confident, that yeah, one thing's finishing, but actually, I feel really, really confident about what I'm able to bring to the market. Is that how it felt, or I'm always surprised at how nervous athletes are when they finish a career, but not
I
many
think,
of them have quite the same background as you have.
yeah. To be honest, I did feel very confident, but I had no idea what to expect from
Mm,
interviews, from the level at which I could get a job. I applied for things from graduate analyst sort of level roles to like middle management roles, to some real reach roles that I realized maybe I wasn't cut out for, just to set a wide base. But you know I focused a lot on crafting a resume and thinking about how I want to sell myself as someone who was an athlete, was an engineer, also led our players association for a long time. So there's a couple things that I was able to hang my hat on from a
mm,
leadership point of view, from an education point of view, and then from a you know professional experience point of view, as well, to sort of mash that together into like, is this the type of person that you would trust to manage a complex project for you, or manage a team. And that took some time, and took some conversations with sporting transition type organizations, some resume builders, and I really just kind of reached out for goodwill to my network to see, hey, where do you
yeah,
think I could slot in as a job, like as an employee, given my background. And for the most part, the people who I was able to engage with all gave me really good advice, and helped fill me with confidence, so that when I did
mm,
get to applying and get a couple of interviews off the back of applying, I was much more confident. But it's still, I think, the imposter syndrome that every athlete has in
yeah,
every moment, um,
yeah,
existed throughout that whole process, continues to exist today. And I think
yeah,
that's a big motivator, and also a big um, a predictor of performance as well. If you don't feel like you belong, you really work your ass off to
mm,
to make sure that whatever you're presenting or whatever you're doing, is as good as you could possibly make it. Um,
yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And what sort of things from your sporting experience in rugby do you think you were consciously and explicitly bringing out in those CVs, in those interviews? Were you leaning on your rugby experience to say, look, I get it, I've probably not got exactly the same work experience as someone who's been working since 21, because obviously I've been busy as a professional. I've tried my hardest to keep my hand in by doing other things on the side,
yes.
working part time. But invariably, there's going to be a gap that's probably not the same as someone who's been working full time since 21. So did you feel like you were having to lean in a little bit on your professional rugby career to kind of make up for maybe some of that gap? Say, okay, I don't have that, but look at this, and it should make up for what I've not got.
To a certain extent, yes, I think so. I think I try not to necessarily talk too much about the soft skills you get from being an athlete in particular. I think they're valuable, and they can be very evident in a conversation with someone who's an athlete. Like how you apply yourself, how diligent you are, like how hard you work, what type of team player you are. Like those, if you are an athlete, you kind of naturally have a lot of those characteristics that
Mm,
evident to people. The things that I did talk about a lot was the work I did with the Players Association, which isn't
mm,
sport exactly, but it's definitely sport adjacent. And I think the skills I gained as a player enabled me to be very successful in that role, over a couple of initiatives. So just to be able to say, hey, I was a leader on the field. I translated my leadership on the field to my leadership with the Players Association. I unionized 500 players in the MLR. I improved the concussion protocols in the MLR with help with player buy-in, but driving these
mm,
initiatives from start to finish. I think that's something I hung my hat on, and that's what I tried to sell as, hey, I have leadership experience, and for what it's worth, this leadership experience from sport is translated into some professional experience where I've been able to demonstrate the capability to drive some things home that are maybe slightly closer to what you would need in someone who's going to manage
mm.
a 6 week consulting engagement focused on the purchase of an offshore wind farm, which is what I do now.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so it's um, Yeah, I don't know. You kind of have to think about the synergies, to use a terrible
Yeah.
corporate word, and find the right bits that um, can help you make your case. And I think I was lucky
Yeah.
the experiences I had that was maybe comparatively easier for me than some other athletes. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, who knows? I mean, I'm 2 years into a corporate career. I have no idea. I've been no idea. Yeah, I'm just go to work every day and try to work my hardest. So
Yeah.
we'll see
We'll
where.
have to rerun this. We'll have
Yeah,
to rerun this in 5 years to see if it's all lived
Valkyrie,
up to the.
Valkyrie's still the same nervous wreck that I am.
You talked a little bit about the Players Association.
Yeah,
Um, I don't know if I don't know if you have been involved or if there's been any initiatives with it. But where do careers and sporting transition kind of sit within either the governing body or the Players Association to kind of support rugby players? Is there something in place? Is it something that you feel needs to be in place? Is there something partially there but just not pushed hard enough? Just curious to kind of
yeah.
learn from your experience, being
Um,
involved with the Players Association.
I think it varies sport to sport and country to country. The RPA in England is in a really good place. They have a number of really great educational initiatives and professional initiatives for players. They try really hard to get guys set up for life after rugby. Rugby is a mature sport here. That makes sense. The French Rugby Players Association also incredible. Um, in the U.S., we had to found our Players Association. We had to fight just for the right to exist as a Players Association. Um, we've had a relationship with USA Rugby for a while. That's always been fairly amicable, um, and we've really been focused on more bare necessities for players.
Mm,
And obviously, we try to think really hard about how we can help players after rugby, but it wasn't the primary focus of the organization at the outset. The primary
mm,
focus of the organization when I was leading the Major League Rugby side of it was, can we get some acceptable concussion protocols? Can we actually form a players association that the league will be willing to work with? So that took about two
yeah.
years to get us to a point where the league would say, hey,
Yeah.
we'll recognize you and we'll allow you to negotiate on behalf of the players. So that's the process that we're
Mm,
going through right now. Still
interesting.
sort of tangentially involved in that, but have mostly stepped back. Um, and over the last 6 months, since we've had this ascension to being the the bargaining agent for the players, we've shifted the focus to start to think about how we can add value to players presently and how we
Mm,
can set them up for life after rugby. So there's been a number of things that we've not me necessarily, but the new leadership group has put together in the last 8 months around discount
mm,
education for graduate school, partnerships
mm,
with
cool.
sales training companies, some transition sort of groups that focus
Mm,
specifically on getting athletes up to speed, pre-entering the job market. So now our focus has shifted more to that, while still trying to keep track of
mm,
player contracts and day to day stuff. So yeah, it's a huge enabler, and you can see how much it's helped. A lot of the playing base in the UK find their feet post rugby. Rugby, in my mind, is somewhat unique because when you retire from rugby, 99% of the guys just got to go get a job, right? Because you haven't made enough money. Maybe
mm,
you've made enough money to buy a house, but you're not like, you can't just sit on that for the rest of your life. Like, you need to work, you need to support your family, and you need to be thinking about what it is you want to do. But
mm.
yeah, so the player associations play a pivotal role.
Interesting. And just kind of looking at it from your own perspective, and imagine you're running a workshop or a session of sorts with some of the players in a session dedicated to sporting transitions. Um, what would be your kind of key message, I guess, to a blossoming 18-year-old or 17-year-old who clearly have huge potential, but could equally get injured, the click of a finger. Um, what would be your kind of advice to them about balancing the requirements of elite sport and also keeping a mindful eye on the future as well?
I mean, like, as an athlete, you set goals in sport. You set like short term goals and long term goals.
Mm,
Like, make sure that your professional development is part of that process, right?
Mm.
You have to think. Let's say you want to go to a World Cup in 5 years or in 9 years, whatever it is. That might be your long term goal, but like you have to set 100 different smaller goals before that to make sure that you can compartmentalize everything. Like there's you need to include within that an element of development outside of sport, right? So you can't you sight of it. If you build this big picture of how you want to be as a rugby player, what your goals are, you can't let um, something like your ultimate goal as an athlete fully overwhelm your sense of purpose post sport, your sense of self worth, and a big enabler to that is like, okay, well, if I am fired next year, like I can jump into this because I've been doing this internship for 6 months, or I've been working on this coding course, or I've been doing whatever it is that interests me outside of rugby, and I've never lost sight of it. It's a big sort of enabler of performance, I think, as well, because you don't just go home from training, sit around, laze around, think about the day, replay the session in your mind, eat food, play video games, go to sleep. Like maybe you spend a half an hour or an hour a couple times a week
Mm.
thinking about something completely different and something that stimulates you, and that will make you much more focused when you get to the rugby, and it'll make you, I think, um, much happier when the rugby isn't there, when you get injured or you don't get selected for something. You'll have something in your mind like, oh, well, I can do this for 6 months. I'll be all right. So I don't know. Never lose sight of it. Like it was always on my mind because I always knew I was like a few months away from just not being a rugby player anymore, or a moment away
Yeah.
from not being a rugby player anymore. I'm just glad I didn't drop out of the bottom of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is there an element that you had to kind of hustle so hard in your rugby career, that you always felt at risk, essentially? So maybe you weren't that 18-year-old where, those clubs are kind of showing tons of interest in you for whatever reason, that you felt like, you got good, but you had to hustle to kind of get there. So have you always felt more vulnerable, maybe, which is why you've maybe also casted an eye on the outside stuff?
Yeah, yeah. I think I always felt. I wouldn't say I'm like this grand hustler and super like the most hardworking, et cetera, et cetera. I think I've like scraped the bottom of the barrel for a while, trying to get myself into the shop window. I had to work hard to do it. Did I have to work harder than some people? Yeah. Did some people work harder than me? I'm sure they did.
Mm.
But like, yeah, I always felt really, really vulnerable in terms of my career, even when I was performing for the U.S. or had a contract in Newcastle. Like I was always knew that I was a step away from not being there without the resume. Or I didn't feel like I had the resume to fall back on another team or another opportunity. I always felt like I was one, shit match or opportunity from not having an option. And frankly, like I think that was probably true for a long time. Probably a moment when I decided to step back and go back to school at Oxford and play in the U.S., where I actually had built a base of a resume around myself through the World Cup, through a couple of
Mm.
good seasons of professional rugby, where I started to get like opportunities to play at a really high level when I didn't want them, which was something that I'd never had. Like when I left France to come back to Oxford to study, I had 3 offers to play at the top level of rugby over the course of 6 months, which I had never had in my life. So it was only when I stupidly maybe decided to think about my future did the
Yeah,
actual offers come into that would have been given me maybe the sense of legitimacy that I always wanted as a professional rugby
yeah,
player. Oh, he played in the top 14 or whatever it was, but that never
yeah,
happened. And frankly, I'm glad because now I'm here and I'm happy and I have my brain and a nice little family and a decent job. So I probably wouldn't have it any other way.
yeah, yeah, understandably. Cool. I've only got a few more questions. One is using sport to get into university. So in the same way as people might use sport to kind of show their credentials to get a job,
Mm.
in one way or another. Do you feel that your background in rugby helped you to solidify or add value to your CV when you applied at, say, Oxford for the masters? Or do you feel like there isn't a strong link between what you're achieving on the rugby pitch? Obviously, your academics need to be in place, but imagine you've got 10 CVs that all look the same because everyone's got a 4.0 GPA or whatever. The rugby acts as a nice differentiator. Do you feel that's the case, or do you feel that's a bit of a stretch?
No, I think that's the case. When I was applying to graduate schools, my rugby experience wasn't the focus of my application. It was something that was mentioned, right? If you had to write a
Mm,
1,000 word essay, maybe it took up 100 words,
yeah.
but it's still there. And I think um, I remember in my Oxford interviews, it didn't come up at all. And one thing, and I found this in interviews as well, is I think if you have something in your background like this, I think it just makes you stand out, just from a CV point of view.
Mm,
Um, like you see a lot of same CV coming through, or very similar CVs coming through when you're interviewing people. Like I saw, I
mm,
was doing an interview for for my current role, and I saw someone had put their 100-meter dash time on their CV, and like that stuck with me. And like that's interesting. I don't know why you do that, but like it was there, and I didn't see it on other CVs. So
mm,
like things like, even perhaps it's just the fact that it's memorable to people and it's interesting. And I think there's an element as well of someone who's slightly more mature and has this team sports experience that maybe makes them you know slightly different than the other, you know 20 candidates they're considering, who have worked a little bit or have 4.0 GPAs from MIT or whatever it might be.
mm.
Um, yeah, so it
But
helped.
but you mentioned they didn't. But you mentioned they didn't ask you about your rugby experience when you interviewed at Oxford. Is there a side of you just felt a bit disappointed that, guys? I mean, I know it's only a footnote on my CV, but nonetheless, surely there's a question to be asked about what I've achieved and what I've done as a rugby player, even as part of what is, I understand, an academic course
Um,
you're applying for.
you know, I wasn't disappointed. I think I kind of go into those situations like I go into work situations as well. Like I've no expectations for people
Yeah.
to know about my background, to have spent more than, like, to want to talk about that. Like I don't think my experience as a rugby player adds any legitimacy to me making the
Mm,
argument for for entry into a particular power market for a client, for example. Like they
mm,
don't give a shit about the fact that
yeah.
I'm a rugby player. So whether it's in academia or not, I think the people who you're trying to sell yourself to or sell a product to, they just want to know that you can, like, do the job. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know if rugby's necessarily, maybe it's interesting, but it's not important. So I never felt like I would go into those situations like, oh well, I hope they ask me about rugby. I love to talk about that. I'm always just kind of
Yeah.
focused on the meat of what they want to know. And if it comes up, if some very rarely someone might say something, and then you can chat about it, but
Mm,
it's not something that I think is super important, because it's there, like it's in the air. They know, they know,
yeah.
um, but it's
Yeah.
not what I think is relevant necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense in the context of especially your job as well, being quite specialist in a way that being a rugby player probably isn't necessarily the educational precursor you need to be successful in the energy markets. Um, I guess the last question, just to wrap up, and that's around, I asked all my guests this, what's your engagement with sport at the moment? So you've talked about that little void still existing, but just curious to know, how you do get that fix that you used to get from rugby, and what your engagement is like with rugby now. So can you watch it on TV and absolutely love it, or do you watch it and feel like, oh, wish that was kind of me still involved? Just curious to know what that relationship is with sport at the moment.
Um, so I do a couple things in rugby. I coach the Oxford University men's team. So there's four of us who coach. I'm one of the assistant coaches, so I coach the forwards. That's fantastic. Great fun, interesting cross section of guys playing for the team. Very, very purpose driven, focused on a single match a year. Elements of high performance in there, elements of team building, really, really critical to success. So that gives me a lot. I really enjoy that. And the coaching team is fantastic as well. Very experienced coaching team too. So that's the main thing I do. I've still tangentially evolved with the Players Association, though I've stepped back massively from my role as chairman, and being replaced very shortly. Um, and that's been good. I'm probably missing a little bit uh, of further work in rugby. I also sit on a sub board of USA Rugby and keep up to date with what's going on in the USA Rugby world. So involved in a couple different ways. Want to be more involved on the governance side of it. Just harder living in the UK with my my unique selling point as a rugby player being knowledge of the U.S. rugby market and U.S. rugby governance. So it's hard to kind of balance being here and potentially being useful from in the American rugby space. So yeah, I would like to be more involved. I do watch rugby. I do enjoy it. I do get pangs of God, I could do that better. Or like God, I wish I was still playing. But fundamentally, I think one of the things I fall back on, and hopefully other athletes feel this way too, is like you look at it and you're like, shit, I used to be able to do that. That's pretty fucking cool.
Mm.
And then you just, you think about where you are currently and where you used to be, and you can condense your career in sport, and it just feels like a moment in time almost sometimes. But
Yeah,
it is quite a yeah. I do enjoy watching it. I'm around the game constantly as a coach, so it is still a big part of my life, and I hope it continues to be in the future.
yeah, super. I mean, it's a tough sport, isn't it? It's you're starting to see stars like LeBron James, starting at 18, still playing at 40. He
Madness.
reckons he can keep going to 45. I mean, yeah, it's physical, but it's nothing like rugby. But yeah, to think of any rugby players even think of continuing in their mid 40s is just yeah, it would be quite something. So yeah, there must be a physicality that you look at and think, wow, I just couldn't be on that pitch right now because
Well,
yeah,
not just,
my knees are aching.
I would hurt myself very quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. Super. Well, awesome, Nick. Thanks so much for all of that kind of all that time going through yeah, I guess your own experience of your sporting career and your sporting transition. So yeah, super grateful for your time, and hopefully this will be quite useful for some other rugby players who are hopefully going to be encouraged to think a bit more about what goes on outside of the sport, and hopefully lead them into a space that you've kind of gone into, which is a transition that on the whole feels pretty good and pretty healthy and very confident. I think that's the main thing actually, for people to come out of sport feeling good, feeling confident, feeling like yeah, I can do this. I shouldn't be daunted by what lies ahead, and you're certainly an excellent example of that. So, yeah, really, really appreciate your time, and yeah, we should be going live pretty soon with this episode.
Thanks, Mark. I really enjoy this. I enjoy having chats on this stuff in particular. It's always good to get the story of a middling professional sportsman out there, and their struggles in the real world. That's the thing that what makes the story sellable and interesting is, what are these people doing now? And
Yeah,
what's the mentality like? So I really enjoyed chatting about this, and thanks for having me on.
that's a super fun topic. Cheers,
Yeah,
Nick.
yeah.